Welcome to Haggy Reads for You on Wolf Spirit Radio. Colleen, Haggy, reads children's stories for the wee ones up to the teens. She also reads books for grown-ups. Tune in, kick back, relax, and listen in. You're listening to Wolf Spirit Radio.
Hi everyone, this is Colleen, and it is November 4th, 2015, and it is Wednesday, and this is Haggy Reads for You, and I'm going to pick up today where I left off last week with the Zephyrus Archives Mission of Eternity. And if you remember, Joseph and Martha and Mary had just gone to the palace to meet Pontius. Pontius held himself in check, and he never carries himself like a slave. I don't recall Yeshua promising they would be beautiful. "Of course not, sir," said Hotep. "That particular promise was made by Zephyrus." "Where's Gordian?" asked Roshiah. "I left him in charge." Hotep simply stated, "He just met Yeshua." Hotep held his hands out as if that was all the explanation needed. Pontius and Roshiah were still trying to assess the situation when a raucous guffaw from Zephyrus drew the attention away from Hotep. Slapping his thigh and teetering on the edge of his chair, Zephyrus fixed Pontius with a look of ultimate amusement. "Oh, Pontius, if only you could have seen yourself when you initially met Yeshua. You were so stunned, I was even getting worried about you." "This may be one of those miracles we've been hearing about," Hotep suggested. "To all appearances, Gordian has been temporarily turned into a statue." Joseph, Roshiah, and Zephyrus lapsed into another round of chortling, as Pontius turned his head to look quizzically at Zephyrus. "Was I really that bad?" Zephyrus gave Pontius a playful smirk. "Maybe worse." "Yeshi!" Yeshua turned and saw Pontius striding across the atrium toward him, flanked by Zephyrus on his left and Joseph on his right, with Roshiah immediately behind Pontius and Hotep following Roshiah. "Pontius!" Yeshua walked away from Martha and Mary to exchange enthusiastic greetings from Pontius and Zephyrus. Martha whispered to Mary, "Sure enough, it's Yeshi and Pontius." "Of course," Mary answered absently, absorbed in the sights of the palace interior. Who would have thought this big stone box would be so sumptuous inside? From the outside you see nothing but a military stronghold. With the doors and windows wide open in the warmth of the early afternoon, the sunlight illuminated the marble construction and mosaic floor. There are individual furnishings in here worth more than most people's homes. "And this is only the atrium," Martha added. "I guess they need a big stone box to protect this kind of wealth. The praetorium is a gigantic strong box." She touched Mary's arm and whispered, "This must be Joseph, beside the governor." Pontius made an open gesture to his right. "Yeshi, I'd like you to meet my dear friend Joseph of Arimathea. You're both famous in the country, so there's no need for further introduction." Pontius watched with a blend of delight and curiosity as the two legendary characters made their first eye contact. Since Pontius could not help but exercise his natural ability to see auras, he marveled at the interplay of energies. He leaned slightly to his left and whispered, "How does Joseph appear to be doing, Zeph?" "It seems as though his insides are dissolving," Zephyrus replied in a soft undertone. Pontius nodded and pursed his lips, soaking in the sight of Joseph. "This is the first time I've seen someone else have this experience, but I keep hearing about it. So this is what it looks like from the outside." "Hello, Joseph," Yeshua murmured softly. "Your spirit is open within you, which is part of why you feel what you're feeling." Pontius did not want to interrupt, but his curiosity moved him to sidle up next to Yeshua and ask, "What's the other part?" Yeshua maintained his eye contact with Joseph. "The other part of why this is affecting you so strongly, Joseph, is that the souls recognize each other. The souls remember making arrangements in heaven to meet on earth. This particular type and level of response you're demonstrating will come only from those who are going to be my close friends throughout the years." Joseph blinked a few times, trying to get reoriented. "Others will also have strong reactions," Yeshua continued, "because the souls know they are about to receive a profound experience. Some will be healed. Some will have their consciousness expanded. Either way, their souls will be changed by meeting me. The souls recognizes me as the agent of their transformation, and the human personality can be shocked upon the initial encounter. You fit into all three categories. You will receive healing, your consciousness will expand, and we will become close friends." Yeshua stepped up to Joseph, embraced him, moved to the side, and rubbed his back. "You're going through a balancing process right now. Your energies have shifted, so you need to find the new point of equilibrium within your being." Yeshua left Joseph's side to embrace Roshaya. "Good to see you, Rosh. It feels like you've done a shift of your own. Part of your rigidity seems to be missing." Pontius and Zephyrus grinned at each other, recalling their pillow fight in the governor's office. But Joseph was still too dazed, so he could not bring himself to partake in the amusement. As soon as the salutations felt fulfilled, Yeshua turned and gestured for Mary and Martha to join the group. Without hesitation, they gracefully crossed the colorful mosaic floor. Even in their unpretentious beige robes, the sisters enhanced the magnificence of the atrium. "As promised," Pontius proclaimed, "the two beautiful women." Mary and Martha both looked inquisitively at Yeshua, but he simply raised his eyebrows and turned his attention back to Pontius. "It was Yeshua who promised you would attend," Pontius told them as they stopped in front of him. "But it was my friend Zephyrus who promised you would be beautiful." Mary beamed a smile of appreciation at Zephyrus, but Martha did not even glance in his direction. Martha obviously felt rather discomfited by the comment, and only managed a polite but sincere smile for Pontius. Zephyrus wished he could disappear into one of the pillars. Yeshua made a show of peering several feet behind Roshaya, where Hotep stood silently. "What do you think about the assessment of the Magdalene sisters offered by Zephyrus?" "Hotep, do you have an observation of your own to add?" Even though he had already met them when they first arrived at the palace, Hotep angled around so he could get a clearer view of Martha and Mary. Wearing his customary wry smile, he boldly gave them an up-and-down appraisal, made eye contact with each of them, and then told Yeshua, "I've never known Zephyrus to be wrong about anything, sir." In the midst of the ensuing laughter, Zephyrus reminded himself to do something nice for Hotep. We really need this comic relief. Yeshua affectionately slid his right arm around Mary's waist. "Pontius, this is Mary." Yeshua's left hand performed a flowing movement from Pontius to Mary. Pontius thought it would be so easy to get lost in her eyes. "Hello, Mary. Your reputation precedes you, and considering the role you play in Yeshua's life, I would be most offended if you called me Governor Pilate when you're in private among friends." He gestured around to indicate everyone in the group, and suddenly realized Hotep was included. Thanks to Yeshi, he engineered this for a reason. Yeshua made a similar hand movement from Mary to Pontius, completing the infinity sign he had begun with the previous gesture. "Mary, this is Pontius." As though floating on a wave of energy from Yeshua's hand, Mary drifted into an embrace with Pontius, and they kissed each other on the cheek. "Hello, Pontius. You have quite a reputation yourself." Mary turned around and gestured toward her sister. "And I hope you will offer the same cordiality to my sister Martha." Pontius graciously nodded. "Ah, yes, the woman of legendary discretion. Tales of your wisdom and beauty have preceded you." Martha's eyes opened noticeably wider. She placed her hands on her hips and swung her head around to skewer Zephyrus with a piercing gaze. Now where could he have heard all this? For a frozen moment, Zephyrus realized that there would be no hiding inside a pillar. Despite the mix of emotions welling within him, he gathered his wits, formulated his plan, and held his hands out wide in a claim of innocence. His mouth curled into an amusing smile. He quickly glanced around at everyone else and then back at Martha. "It's true." The others all laughed, including Martha, who moved over to give Zephyrus a tight hug and a loud kiss on the cheek. She stood back and held his upper arms. "And now, if you don't mind, I'm going to allow Pontius the opportunity to get to know me on his own." Pontius quietly shook with joyful spasms, witnessing his friend's discomfort. "And now I get to meet the woman who has shaken mighty Zephyrus to his core." As Martha approached Pontius, her eyes bore into him, and the golden light shined brightly around her head. When she released herself from their embrace, she showered him with a profoundly loving energy. For a fleeting moment, he saw his entire visual field washed with pink light. He refocused on Martha's delightful smile. Discerning that Pontius had absorbed her energetic offering, Martha told him, "You really know how to pick your friends, Pontius." Yes, I do, he agreed. As do you. Pontius gave Yeshua a knowing smile. Amazing pink with these two. And the light around their heads? Yeshua queried. Impressive. As Pontius adjusted his vision into a softer focus, Mary sashayed over to Martha. The sisters leaned sideways into one another, spontaneously giggled, and then turned their heads toward each other and shared a quick kiss on the lips. Pontius thought, they can generate this pink light at will. Cheek to cheek, Mary and Martha grinned impishly at Pontius. While their individual lights had radiated beautifully, he now observed how they were able to amplify each other's radiance. Pontius played with his focus, marveling that the Magdalene sisters glowed brightly, even with the sunlit doorway directly behind them in his field of vision. Brighter than sunlight. Without removing his gaze from them, he voiced his observation. These two have each been initiated into something I have never even imagined. Chapter 7. These two are devoted. Zephyrus paused as he re-entered the room. His couch waited for him in a circle of couches occupied by Yeshua, Mary, Joseph, and Pontius. Hotep sat in a padded chair several feet behind Pontius, listening intently to their conversation. Zephyrus took a few steps to the side, where he could see Roshaya and Martha, still involved in their own conversation out on the balcony. The two discreet ones, he observed. He consciously dismissed another twinge of jealousy. He could easily discern that Roshaya and Martha were engaged in a philosophical discussion, and were not pursuing anything beyond a casual friendship. Still, he envied the time and attention Roshaya was receiving from Martha. Martha registered with him as a deep and complex being, and not easy for Zephyrus to read. As a matter of far more importance, he knew his feelings were getting in his way. If he were ever to understand this fascinating woman, he would need to make some inner adjustments. First, he would need to understand himself. Why did she affect him this way? Why did he ache? Until now, he'd always delighted in women as playthings, and had never encountered a woman who touched his very soul. Meeting Martha had even impacted his sexual playtime at the palace. Instead of toying with multiple women, he now focused on developing a substantial relationship exclusively with Eumelia. He could never return to seeing women the way he had before encountering Martha. Drawing a full breath and slowly releasing it, Zephyrus allowed unwanted energies to dissipate into the atmosphere. Part of him felt embarrassed that he was allowing a woman to have so powerful an influence in his life. He physically shook himself and slowly ambled across the floor. In his peripheral vision, he noticed Hotep turn and suddenly signal for his attention. Appropriately, Hotep said nothing, but non-verbally communicated the impression to Zephyrus that something exciting was about to happen for Zephyrus. The most effective way for me to understand the true political climate of the province, Pontius was saying, would be to learn it from people like you. So many of the Judeans are thoroughly agendistic, and so they twist all information to suit their own causes. They're not reliable sources. For example, consider how the anti-Roman sentiment has mutilated the story of the effigies, the ridiculous incident that blemished my arrival in Judea. Mary laughed more loudly than the others. Perhaps you haven't heard yet, but now people are claiming that they had to occupy your courtyard in Caesarea for several days to persuade you to remove the effigies. She and the others made no effort to conceal their amusement with the baffled expression on Pontius's face. Mary added, "And evidently one of Herod's sons has been claiming he had to go over your head and appeal directly to Tiberius Caesar himself, who of course rebuked you so severely. So it was the emperor who gave the order to remove the effigies, and not you." Slumping and shaking his head, Pontius muttered, "Even though those effigies have been removed long before any ship could have made it halfway to Rome, much less there and back again. But I suppose no one bothers to make any sense of the timing of events." "Of course not," Joseph told him. "Besides, by next year, all the timing will have been lost in the mists of memory. And don't forget about the thousands of people who marched halfway to Caesarea, only to meet their own people returning with the good news. The order had already been given to remove the effigies from Herod's palace. So they turned around and headed back to Jerusalem without having gotten anywhere near Caesarea. Mark my words, Pontius, those very people will conveniently fail to remember their own timing. Most of them will probably end up boasting of their brave deeds in your courtyard, challenging the legionnaires to kill them on the spot." Pontius chuckled, gesturing toward each of the guests. "Which is precisely why I need to learn from people like you, who don't have political or religious agendas, those of you with honesty and intelligence." "A tragically rare combination," Zephyrus put in, as he resumed his seat. "Zeph, I'm glad you're back," exclaimed Pontius. "I have a new assignment of duties for you." "You what?" "Easy now," Pontius urged him. "Trust me on this." Zephyrus nodded and glanced over at Hotep, whose expression reminded him to expect something exciting. Zephyrus calmed himself as he observed the anticipation in the beaming faces around him. "I'll always trust you, Pontius, but I'm shocked by your statement, and I'm suddenly haunted by an eerie feeling of an impending something huge." Pontius let Zephyrus settle into a receptive mode. "This will require an adjustment on both of our parts. As much as I love having you around the palace most of the time, I feel overwhelmingly impelled to relieve you of most of your palace duties. Most of those duties can be handled by my other aides." "Look at the shock on his face," exclaimed Joseph, who seemed elated at the news. "Come to your senses, Zeph. Are you telling me that you're going to miss greeting all of your favorite leeches who crawl into the palace for morning salutations?" Zephyrus stared at Joseph a moment, and then wiped his head around to address Pontius. "You mean I really don't have to go through that ordeal any more?" Pontius gazed at Zephyrus with a look of compassion and appreciation. "Zeph, it's going to be difficult for me not to have you with me on a regular basis. We've been constant companions for over a decade. But this is going to prove strategically invaluable. You'll still be my closest advisor, more so than ever. And I'll still want you for all the crucial decision-making in the office. But now, I feel it's absolutely imperative for you to take on this new assignment. Zephyrus tilted his head. Which is? Swallowing hard, Pontius wiped a tear from his eye. Zeph, I want you to learn everything you possibly can, directly from Yeshua. I want you to follow him around the country. As often as we can spare you from the palace, I want you with his entourage. Of course, I'll expect you to relay the teachings to me, since I'll be stuck in my assigned position. I won't be able to spend nearly as much time as I'd like learning directly from the Master. I want you to be my go-between. Pontius sighed heavily. You're incredibly capable in this area, Zeph, and as a matter of immeasurable significance, I know you'll also enjoy your political adroitness on this assignment. You'll become an infiltrator among the people. You can help us avoid another violent rebellion in this province. And I'm taking you at your own words. I'm placing you in charge of Yeshua's security. My own words? You volunteered for this the day you first encountered Yeshua, Pontius reminded him. Perhaps you don't remember, but in the midst of your zealous report, you insisted that we place Yeshua under our protection. You suggested that we do it immediately, and at the pinnacle of your passion, you said you would do it yourself. Zephyrus could scarcely breathe, let alone speak. There's no way to overstate how essential your mission will be to our success in governing Judea, Pontius assured him, and what it will mean for both of us personally in our soul growth. Zeph, we've spent all these years chasing after teachers and philosophers, delving into all the pertinent writings we could find. Zephyrus let the tears roll down his cheeks. And now we have something beyond all those wise men combined, right here, sitting in this room with us. But he can't stay in the palace with us. He has to carry his message around the country. And more to the point, he has to carry his living essence directly to the people. And since most of them can't come to him, he has to go to them. And I want you to go with him, learn from him, and help him in any way that you can, especially when it comes to keeping him safe. Joseph has volunteered to help you set up an intelligence network to monitor Caiaphas and his priests and their minions. Pontius came near to sobbing and also let his tears flow. So this is your new assignment of duties from the governor. They smiled wanly at each other through their tears. And I will brook no debate on the matter. Let this be the first, last, and only time I ever pull rank and overrule you on anything. But I doubt it would be necessary to pull rank. I know you understand. To label Yeshi a national treasure is to understate the matter, and to ignore the lethal threat posed by Caiaphas would constitute the sheerest folly. Zephyrus wiped his tears to clear his vision. In his eye-to-eye connection with Pontius, he joined his dearest friend in the transcendent space where the souls and the human persona can mesh, in the place of knowing. Zephyrus vocalized a Whew! As he allowed his attention to drift from face to face. He saw the tears of understanding everywhere. His gaze finally settled on Yeshua. So, are you speaking anywhere tomorrow morning? Genuine surprise registered on Yeshua's face. His expression ran the gamut, from disbelief to amusement, and he answered the question haltingly. Yes, I'm speaking tomorrow morning, but you can't attend. Everyone else appeared confused except Mary. She sang forth in her musical giggling. This is so funny, Zeph. For the first morning of your new assignment, Yeshi's friend Saul has organized a group for a talk in the outer courtyard of the temple. It would be considered mildly inappropriate for a pagan like you to attend. This would be compounded by the fact that you're a high-ranking Roman official. Scratching his head, Pontius mumbled, Off to a good start. He chuckled along with everyone else, musing over the irony of the situation. That's all right, Zeph. We can begin training your replacements in the morning, and you can ease your way into your new mission. But this brings to mind another issue, your appearance. It simply won't do to have you in Yeshua's entourage, looking like a Roman, much less like a Roman official. Even as you learn their ways, it won't help to have the very sight of you putting people ill at ease. You want to blend in with the populace. I can handle all of that, Joseph assured them. I might find myself sitting in the presence of a spiritual master. He comically swung his head around to look at Yeshua. But the spiritual master is sitting in the presence of a master of disguise. Joseph peered out of the corner of his eyes at Pontius. You'd be surprised how much of my work is conducted in disguise. Among other things, I'm part of my own intelligence network. So, just let your imagination run riot with that idea. Joseph turned back to Zephyrus. I could make you look like a Nubian princess if I wanted. Helping you blend in with the Judeans won't pose a problem. But we don't need to start this tomorrow, so it doesn't call for any radical approach. Right from the start, we can outfit you with appropriate clothing. Second, I would recommend that you let your hair grow to a civilized length. He winked at Pontius. And that you stop shaving. Get plenty of sunshine on your complexion, which is good for you anyway. And within a matter of months, people won't even take a second glance. Zephyrus pondered Joseph's proposition of letting his hair and beard grow. Something stirred within him, and erupted to the surface. His body jolted with the realization. Just be with this thought, Zeph, suggested Mary, evoking a mystical tone reminiscent of Yeshua's teaching voice. And let yourself be with the feelings. She gazed at Zephyrus, allowing a beatific smile to radiate from her face. Softly, with a distant voice, she mused aloud. I love how it's so easy for me to read Zephyrus. I feel I know him like a brother. She asked Yeshua, Did you see what happened within him? Yeshua nodded thoughtfully. He awakened something in his body, like recovering a connection to his bloodlines. What did you sense? This harkens back to his Celtic heritage. Mary shifted her gaze over to Zephyrus and spoke of him in the third person. If his people hadn't been conquered, he would have been wearing a beard and longer hair all these years. Something in Zephyrus would love to be a little less Roman, and his body itself is responding to the idea. Joseph gestured wildly. I'm simply filled with brilliant ideas. You're right, Mary, Zephyrus acknowledged. That's exactly what I was thinking and feeling. And the imagery that came to me is that I'm a lion, born in captivity and stripped of its mane. Interesting analogy, Pontius observed. I always knew your wild Celtic blood would eventually win out, and here I'm the one facilitating. At the very least, we're creating an outlet for those energies. He placed his hands over his heart and grinned at Zephyrus. Just don't forget your old Roman friends. Mary vocalized an ooh as she softened her gaze at Pontius. You know, Pontius, there is something within you that's not completely Roman, even though you come from the heart of the empire. Pontius noted that the light around Mary's head had become brighter and more clearly defined. He told Yeshua, she's good. Yeshua smiled. I already knew that, but thanks for the confirmation. You're Italian, aren't you, Pontius? Asked Joseph. Yes, Pontius replied. The Pontius clan itself heralds from north-central Italia. My not-so-distant forebears prided themselves on their long, stubborn resistance to the expansion of Rome, and yet here we are, dyed-in-the-wool Roman cavalrymen. And yes, Mary, according to the Roman map of today, I herald from the very heart of the empire. But Pontius is able to do something I can't, Zephyrus interjected. Yes, unlike you, I can accept reality and deal with it, Pontius teased. Rome expanded, despite my stalwart family's best efforts, and so now we're all Romans. I choose to honor that fully. I just found out earlier today, Joseph told Mary and Yeshua, that this is the only area where these two don't agree. It's obviously never gotten in the way of their friendship, especially since this can be such an intense issue, and their passions run so deep. I admire the way that they can simply accept each other for who they really are. They give each other plenty of latitude to express their differing views. These two souls have shared many lifetimes, Yeshua pondered, with an air of observing Pontius and Zephyrus from far away. They've started many journeys together, life after life, and never quite gotten any of them finished. They never quit trying, though, and so here they are again. And there's something in the nature of the empire that appeals to both of them, perhaps to Pontius a little more than to Zephyrus, and that's the Pax Romana, the Roman peace. War of any kind is not permitted within the borders. Rebellions and civil wars are bad for business, Joseph declared. Even a minor war can devastate production and trade. Worse yet, it can take several years to recover the losses. Most of the Roman elite have come to regret the cost of their own internal conflicts, but their ambitious greed occasionally overshadows their sensibilities. However, they will never tolerate individual provinces fighting each other, much less tolerate revolts against Roman rule. And the foremost possibility for a violent revolt, continued Yeshua, is right here in Judea. Even though they're warriors, Pontius and Zephyrus prefer leading lives of peace. On a deep level, These two are devoted to maintaining the Pax Romana. However fascinating for them to find themselves in an extremely volatile province, where they've been charged by the Emperor himself with keeping the peace. And collecting taxes, added Joseph. That's one more awkward piece they need to juggle without dropping anything. What are some of your dreams in life, Hotep? Asked Martha. For one, I'd like to become learned, like Zephyrus, or like you. He smiled impishly as Martha looked askance at him. I overheard Yeshua telling Joseph that you're also a scholar. Hotep indicated where Yeshua and Joseph were still conversing, standing next to a food-laden table, nibbling on dried fruits. Hotep watched as Pontius came sauntering around a pillar and joined in the conversation with Joseph and Yeshua. Forgive me if I seem distracted, Martha. I'm keeping an eye on everyone in case anybody needs anything. And since it's now late afternoon, I know the governor will want everyone to share the sunset with him. I'm good at herding his guests where he wants them. Otherwise, he ends up fretting like a shepherd with a lost sheep. He really loves the sunset, and it means a lot for him to share that time with his friends. I wouldn't say you're distracted, Martha told him. Your mind is able to handle numerous tasks simultaneously. That's a useful trait for scholarship. Hotep's dark eyes darted back to hers. You're intimating that your mind is so capable, then. Could you give me an example of how you would make use of this trait in your studies? You often draw from several scrolls at the same time to help elucidate your understanding of the primary focus of your research, she explained. I often have as many as a dozen scrolls rolled out on my table. In my mind, I keep track of each scroll and which part of the scroll contributes to what I'm studying. I could do that, Hotep responded. Right now, in my mind, I know the governor is speaking with Joseph and Yeshua at the food table. I also know the supplies are ample, especially the wine, because only Joseph and the governor have had a little, indeed very little, and the rest of us have been drinking water. I've lighted a few lamps because the shadows are growing long outside, and I will soon need to light a few more lamps. I also anticipate that Mary will return at any moment from refreshing herself, and I wonder which of these three conversations will attract her interest, because I'm also aware that on the other side of the room, Zephyrus is asking Roshaya lots of questions about Roshaya's earlier conversations with you. And I also find it amusing that Zephyrus has maneuvered his position relative to Roshaya's so he can easily steal glances at you. Hotep's eyes twinkled with innocent mischief. He's quite taken with you, and you know it perfectly well. But you're an extremely cautious person, and you have many thoughts and feelings to weigh in the balance on the matter. Martha laid a hand on Hotep's upper arm. Yes, Hotep, your mind can keep tracks of many things at once, and that will help you in your pursuit of scholarship. And I'm becoming too personal for one of your level of discretion. I understand. Hotep's wry smile enhanced his disarming expression of sincerity. But may I share one more observation? Only one. Hotep asked, aside from the observation that Mary has now entered the room and is standing by one of the pillars wondering which group to join? Martha giggled. Yes, aside from that one. I've only known Zephyrus for about a month and a half, he told her, and I've already come to love him. It might be wise to give yourself a month to sort out your feelings for Zephyrus, and Mary is heading in our direction. Martha playfully shook a scolding finger at him. You added an extra observation. Hotep shook his head. No, Martha, I merely enhanced a previous one. Martha started chortling and placed a hand over her heart. Mary walked up from behind and put her arm around Martha's waist. Mary nuzzled and kissed her. See? I told you it'd be all right. I said you'd enjoy this. In spite of Zephyrus making her feel uncomfortable, Hotep observed. Mary snuggled her face in her sister's hair and giggled, as Martha quietly moaned, Oh, Hotep, please! I've been hearing enough from my sister. Mary continued squeezing Martha from behind, nuzzling her some more. Come on, Martha. You're going to have to face this. But not for another month, said Hotep. Still hugging Martha, Mary looked over her sister's shoulder at Hotep. She focused on him intently, wearing a confused but inquisitive expression. Another month? Hotep nodded. Yes, I've given her another month to interrogate her feelings regarding Zephyrus. Mary's jaw slowly dropped as it dawned on her that Hotep and Martha had been discussing this topic. She could feel the pulsations of Martha's quiet laughter. This is good for her. She needs to laugh more. Mary raised her eyebrows in amusement and told Hotep, Well, that's very generous of you. Hotep placed a hand over his heart and gave her a slight bow. I do strive to be magnanimous. As Martha and Mary giggled, Hotep moved a few steps to the side. Is it time for the balcony, Governor? Pontius looked outside, realizing he had lost track of time. Yes, Hotep, it's almost sunset. Hotep smoothly swung around to face Mary and Martha. He made a sweeping gesture toward the balcony. The seats have already been arranged for you. His bright smile flashed and was gone, as he slid across the floor in the direction of Zephyrus and Roshaya. The 7 balcony chairs formed an arc facing west. Pontius took the seat in the center. To his left sat Yeshua, Mary, and Martha. To his right sat Zephyrus, Joseph, and Roshaya. Once they were all seated, Hotep sat down in a lone chair several feet off to the left. Pontius continued his conversation with Yeshua. You're drawing fair-sized crowds now, aren't you? Yeshua shook his head, frowning slightly. Not really. Nowhere near what it needs to be if I'm going to have any significant effect on the nation. It was the size of your crowd that attracted my attention in the first place, Pontius mentioned. Aren't most of your audiences about that size now? Yes, but appearances can be deceiving, Yeshua replied. The problem is, half of the audience is the same crowd that follows me around all the time. Ah, Pontius intoned. Yes, that makes a difference. I hadn't thought of that, but now that you mention it, it's obvious. And does that include those vagabonds who trail along after you like dogs? Asked Joseph. I've been hearing great things about you, but not such great things about them. Zephyrus asked, Are any of them actually promising students? A few, but only a few, Yeshua acknowledged. But they all mean well, and they help with essential tasks, so they serve their purpose. Security as well? Suggested Pontius. As Yeshua nodded, Mary piped up, That's about all Simon's good for. He bungles almost everything, but he's brazen and protective. Joseph threw his head back, giggled, and then sighed. I suppose that's a reasonable combination for security purposes. Martha curled her legs beneath her robe, unconsciously striking a casual pose of beauty and dignity. Thomas is the only genuinely intelligent one in the group. Not that the rest of them are all at Simon's level, but Thomas is the only one who could sit here with us and make a contribution. Pontius stroked his chin. He told Yeshua, It's quite possible. There could be times you'll need the extra security we're providing, especially if the priests get any more upset with you. Which they will, insisted Roshiah. Even at your current level of activity, Yeshua, they feel threatened. That's true, Joseph agreed. Which reminds me, Yeshi, since I sit on the Sanhedrin Council, we can't let it be known that we spend a lot of time together like this, much less that I'm actually your student. I can serve as your eyes and ears inside the council, and even inside the temple, but that won't work if they know you're my close friend and teacher. Excellent idea. Imitating Joseph's earlier gesture, Jeshua grinned at Joseph. But we've already known that you're simply filled with brilliant ideas. Everyone chuckled, which helped relieve the tension. No one felt comfortable thinking about the high priest Caiaphas and his potential for violence. Caiaphas and his power-mongers on the Sanhedrin Council were not ethically above ordering an assassination attempt. But it would probably take a year or more for the possibility to grow into a serious concern. For now, it felt better simply to laugh the possibility off and enjoy the evening. Joseph leaned back, nestling into the cushions on his chair. I love being brilliant. I've already begun scripting my public act. Publicity. This will appear like a mere fascination, and I can even tease the priests and council members that I'm supporting Yeshua simply to annoy them. Most of them would never believe I would become a serious student of anything, anyway, especially something that looks religious or spiritual. How little they know you, Yeshua murmured. And I prefer to keep it that way, Yeshua intently stated. Pontius heaved a vocal sigh and addressed Yeshua. I will feel 100 times better with Zephyrus in charge of your security, which calls for some extra sagacity. Zephyrus put in, turning to face Yeshua, because I can't let your vagabonds know I'm actually in charge. Especially Simon, Mary declared. He would throw another one of his tantrums. He's got all the maturity of a 5-year-old, Martha added, and he certainly has earned his nickname. His nickname? Pontius inquired. Yeshua, Mary, and Martha smiled knowingly at each other. Mary leaned over and rubbed Yeshua's shoulder. Yeshi gave Simon a nickname. Yeshua gave a tentative shrug. Simon had been more irritating than usual that day. He feigned a sheepish grin for Pontius. I'm not always the kind, patient man you'd expect. Mary's laughter filled the air with a magical energy. One day, when Simon was indeed being Simon, Yeshi stopped and glared at him. Everybody froze. You don't see a look like that on Yeshua's face every day, In fact, I'd never seen it, Martha exclaimed, because I wasn't there that day, unfortunately. Yeshe took one step toward Simon, Mary continued, and we all wondered if the assault was going to be physical or verbal. And then Yeshe pointed at him and said, "Simon, you have a head like a rock. I know your name is Simon, but from now on, I'm going to call you Rock." Everybody fell down laughing, and we all adopted the nickname. "Were you speaking Aramaic?" Zephyrus asked. "Yes." "So then you called him Cephas." Turning to Pontius, Zephyrus added, "I'm going to have to really sharpen up on my Aramaic." "We can help with that," Mary offered, overflowing with enthusiasm. "We can have you over to the house and speak nothing but Aramaic. And if you don't understand something, that's your problem. You'll have to ask your questions in Aramaic and receive your explanations in Aramaic. That will prove effective because another thing I see in you is that you perform at your best under pressure." In his peripheral vision, Zephyrus noted a slight but visible tension come over Martha, who realized she would now have to accept Zephyrus as a regular guest in the privacy of her own home. So as not to discomfort Martha any further, he kept his eyes on Mary. "Thanks, Mary. I already have a fair knowledge of the language, but my main concern will be getting rid of my accent." "You'll do well," Pontius assured him. "Just consider your ability to do impressions of other people, to duplicate their idiosyncratic speech patterns." Pontius grinned and addressed Yeshua. 6 years ago, it got him into a bit of trouble with one of the senators. Zephyrus did some entertaining during a visit to Rome. This particular senator didn't care much for the impression of himself, but understandably he couldn't fully appreciate it, because we don't really know what we sound like or look like to other people. But what the senator could not begin to abide was the imitation of his wife. It was entirely too accurate. Zephyrus exhaled rapidly and leaned back in his chair. "But Tiberius loved it, and that's what saved me." Turning back to Zephyrus, Pontius continued, "But you had to promise you would never repeat such a performance in public again. But the reason I brought this up is to encourage you in outgrowing your accent when you speak Aramaic. Since you can duplicate the subtle intricacies of other people's speech patterns, you can learn to speak Aramaic without an accent. Simply spend a lot of time with one of these people and mimic what you hear. All you'll be doing is mastering another impression." "I'll help as well," offered Joseph. Addressing Mary, he suggested, "How about if we visit your house early tomorrow evening, soon after sundown? That way, I'll be able to come and go under cover of darkness." "Why don't you disguise yourself?" asked Roshaya, making it clear he was teasing. "Second, because I would rather look like myself when I'm with my friends. And third, I'll be working late into the afternoon as myself." "Give me a fourth reason and I might accept your excuse," Roshaya prodded. Joseph played along. "Fourth, I'm still waiting for my next shipment of Numidian princess makeup." As the ensuing wave of merriment spent itself, Yeshua gave Joseph an appraising look. "But the fifth reason is the best. It's wise not to go to the well too often. you run the risk of discovery every time you operate in disguise. It only takes once, and you'd have a whole new set of problems. Joseph picked up on the thread of Yeshua's thought. And whenever you're operating in stealth, the risk increases proportionately to the number of people who might recognize you. This is precisely why I rarely don a disguise in the city, especially in broad daylight. The last time I did that was 5 years ago. He shifted to the right and smirked at Roshaya. Are you satisfied yet? Let's take a vote, suggested Roshaya. All those in favor of accepting Joseph's excuse, raise your right hand. Sitting at his present angle, Joseph smiled as he saw Roshaya, Martha, and Mary raise their right hands. But turning to his left, he noticed Yeshua, Pontius, and Zephyrus had folded their arms. They feigned obstinacy and contorted their faces as though trying to hide their grins. You three, cried Mary. Honestly, now it's a split vote. Joseph raised his own right hand. Oh, no, Zephyrus insisted. You can't vote on this yourself. Joseph stood up and peered over Mary's head. Hotep? Hotep rose to his feet with a comical air of self-importance. He promptly raised his right hand and turned his head to Pontius. Forgive me, Governor, but you've been outvoted. Thank you. Throwing his arms open wide, Joseph collapsed into his chair and pretended to be exhausted from the whole ordeal. Another coincidence, thought Pontius. From his angle, as he looked at Hotep, Pontius had to look directly over Yeshua's head. It almost appeared that Hotep's head sat on top of Yeshua's, and Pontius could not help but note the sheer delight on Yeshua's features. Yeshua likes him too. Pontius glanced to his right, where Zephyrus rocked with giddiness. And Zephyrus, the two most trusted people in my life. Pontius marveled that Hotep had remained standing, smiling, basking in the delightful response to his joke. And it occurred to Pontius that he himself was the only one of the seven not enjoying the moment. He squirmed in his seat, but realized that no one else had noticed his lack of levity, because they were lost in the spasms of their own laughter. He felt a nameless old energy pattern spontaneously release itself from his system. His body gulped a full breath of cool evening air and released it in the sounds of mirth. Pontius found himself chuckling along with the others as their gleeful energy diminished. The thought of a slave asserting himself obviously had not registered with any of his friends. Pontius let loose a sigh and began viewing Hotep in a new light. Even his voice carried a tone he himself did not recognize. Anything else, Hotep? Yes, sir. It's truly a beautiful sunset in progress. Hotep resumed his seat in the midst of the oohs and ahs. No two sunsets identical, Martha softly mentioned. And each one always in a state of change, added Mary. Never truly identical from one moment to the next. Pontius gazed at the sunset as he absorbed all the murmurs of assent from those around him. Those people he had chosen for this experience of sharing a sunset. Each person here has an important role to play. He pondered a situation, that this particular governorship constituted the absolute pinnacle of his career. and that the bulk of its potential success lounged on his balcony with him at this moment, soaking up the beauty of the western sky. Pontius and Zephyrus had ventured forth to this unstable province, unswervingly intent on fulfilling their mission, and here they had found key allies. Whatever the execution of their mission might at any point require, they would preserve the Pax Romana. Chapter 8. He will hire professionals. Hotep swung each of the massive doors open as wide as possible. He smiled amiably but deviously, standing aside and making a subtle gesture from the atrium toward the courtyard. The smile appeared quite amiable to the last group of clients in the atrium, but that same smile appeared thoroughly devious to Zephyrus, who understood the message of Hotep's body language. Get out! Ah, the bright sunlight of a full spring morning, Zephyrus voiced with a studied phoniness that only Hotep appreciated. The flowers in the courtyard are blooming riotously. With an equally studied nonchalance, he moved in the general direction of the sunlight, but directly toward an immobile client, who unconsciously turned awkwardly and fell in step with Zephyrus. Although the sudden flood of sunlight illuminated the resplendent mosaic floor and marble construction of the praetorium's interior, Zephyrus wanted to direct the client's attention, and especially their bodies, toward the beauty outside. When the gardens are in full bloom, they add such lovely accents to the architecture. I love the way the sun accentuates the alabaster pillars, and since the sun is risen, we can see the full resplendence now. Once he had the mass of 11 people moving along with him, Zephyrus steadily picked up his pace, ushering them into the courtyard. He leaned his head back and made a show of sniffing the fresh air. Ah, the sweet perfumes of nature. None of the clients took notice that one of the doors was already closing right at their heels. I wish you all a pleasant morning and a productive day. That'll be the day when these parasites do anything productive. Rather than stop near the threshold, he took over 20 strides into the courtyard before gracefully swinging to the side, saluting, Ave Caesar! He nodded as they returned the Ave. Zephyrus flashed a genuine smile to the group as he waved with a flourish. The smile helped the wave of dismissal appear friendly, and the smile was indeed genuine. He felt genuinely glad to get rid of these people, and genuinely happy for himself for having navigated this passage without acknowledging a single individual with eye contact. Go run your little errands for Pontius. Earn your bags of food. Zephyrus lulled his head and crossed his eyes as he approached Hotep and Gordian at the doors. Only one door stood partly open. Artfully done, sir. Thanks, Hotep. Sneering at Gordian, Zephyrus asked, What did you think, Gordian? Could you pull the leeches off Pontius like that? Did you take note of any specific moves I employed? Wait, I have a question first, Gordian told him. What was the urgent matter that needed the governor's attention? Did I say anything about it being urgent? Zephyrus asked. Gordian hesitated, and Hotep answered on his behalf. No, you didn't. You merely ran up to him and handed him a scroll saying, "Excuse me, Governor, but here's a matter that requires your attention." I take it for granted that the subject matter of the scroll was irrelevant. It wouldn't matter anyway, because everything in the Praetorium constitutes a matter of concern for the governor. You merely acted like the situation was urgent. Gordian shifted from a narrow gaze at Hotep to an inquisitive gaze at Zephyrus. "Really? Is that what you did?" "But there truly was an urgent matter, Gordian," Zephyrus stated emphatically, "and that was to get those leeches off of Pontius." Gordian stared blankly. "Any observations, Gord?" Zephyrus asked. Gordian slowly shook his head. "Hotep?" "Yes, sir." "You smiled pleasantly and nodded, but not directly at any of the clients. None of them noticed that your glance was directed between two of them, and that you made eye contact with me." Grinning at Gordian, Hotep added, "That was our prearranged signal for me to open the doors wide." Gordian loosened up a bit and chuckled. "It sounds like a conspiracy against the clients." Hotep nodded. "Precisely. And you might have noticed the way Zephyrus employed several techniques at once. To herd the clients into the courtyard, as I said, artfully done." Gordian scratched his head and furrowed his brow. "No, I don't think I could identify a specific technique." "Did he hold their attention inside the atrium?" asked Hotep. "Or did he direct their attention outside into the courtyard, where he wanted their bodies to go?" "Ah, yes, I see," replied Gordian. "And when Zephyrus began walking toward the open doors," Hotep continued, "he strode directly at the pudgy laggard who was slowing down the group." "Oh, yes," Gordian mused, "that was Publius. I remember him looking confused and surprised. He sort of staggered when he tried to get out of Zeph's way, and then walked beside him." Gordian scratched his head again and addressed Zephyrus. "I will set myself to the task of mastering that right away," Gordian promised. "But I have to say, Zeph, you seem to entertain quite an attitude toward the vast majority of clients." "Deservedly so," Zephyrus responded. "And Pontius feels much the same way, although he conceals it. On one hand, he holds on to the doctrine that the patron-client relationship serves as the backbone of Roman society. But Pontius finds most of his clients repugnant. Shifting his posture and his mood, Zephyrus took on a businesslike demeanor. "Now, Gordian, will you tell Pontius I'm leaping into my mission? I'll be gone most of the day, and I will report in to him late in the afternoon, and also let him know that I've taken Hotep with me." "Sure, Zeph." Smiling wistfully, Gordian stepped forward and embraced Zephyrus. "The palace is going to feel empty without you, Zeph. It's hard to believe the governor is assigning you duties outside his immediate circle. But these are strange times, and they call for strange measures." Gordian drew back, patted Zephyrus firmly on the shoulder, and walked through the partially open door into the atrium. "You're taking me with you? That's exciting," Hotep exclaimed, pulling the door closed. "Where are we going?" "To the barracks. Let's go." Striding purposefully back into the courtyard, Zephyrus took on a visage of deathly, serious intent. "It's time to start your training." Hotep trotted a few steps to fall in stride with Zephyrus. "If we're heading for the barracks, does that mean you're going to train me to be a soldier?" "No, Hotep. That would be a waste for both of us and for the mission. But you're somewhat on the right track, because I'm going to begin training you in weaponry. Zeph, I understand it's an earnest mission, but, well, let's get past the laggard clients first. Good idea, Zephyrus muttered as they strode through the gardens. Without slowing their pace, they ignored the lingering clients and exchanged superficial greetings with the spear-bearing legionnaires. Once they neared the gates of the barracks area, Zephyrus slowed their pace and resumed his intense deportment. I'm taking it for granted you'll give yourself wholeheartedly to the mission, Hotep. Absolutely. Pontius has put you in charge of Yeshua's protection, and I would lay down my life for Yeshua without hesitation. Peeking out of the corner of his eye, Hotep grinned impishly, realizing that it had failed to register with Zephyrus that Hotep had referred to the governor as Pontius. I don't harbor the slightest trace of doubt, Hotep. Zephyrus halted, as did Hotep, and they turned to face each other. Hotep, when I observed you and Yeshua interacting, I knew. And when you know, you know. And even though I know, you're going to have to be tested. We both need absolute certainty that you can fully take on the assignment I've dreamed up for you. We have the necessary certainty spiritually, mentally, and emotionally. But now, we're going to force the issue and make sure you have it physically. I understand I'll need to be initiated, Hotep acknowledged, and I'm anxious to prove myself to both of us. It's obviously a matter of life and death, and if I'm being trained as a bodyguard, yes, but that's only a minuscule portion of my vision for you. Glancing around to assure himself that no one could hear, Zephyrus lowered his voice to a growl. Hotep, I'm training you to be a spy. That's 100 times more consuming and involved than working as a bodyguard. Hotep made a show of casually observing the sky as they began walking again, but his voice expressed a breathless awe. Then it's also 100 times more exciting and 1,000 times more rewarding. Zephyrus nodded to the guards at the entrance of the barracks and graced them with a quick but sincere good morning. He led Hotep into the ground floor of the tower and made straight for the equipment room. Within minutes, Hotep found himself strapped into an array of paddings. My head is swimming, Zeph. It feels as though my whole life were transforming, and I guess that's exactly what it's doing. Well, practice with wooden training weapons, Zephyrus instructed him in a flat, no-nonsense voice. Here, put on this belt. You're not going to wear my padding? Hotep asked. Hotep, do you really think you could penetrate my defenses? I didn't think of it that way, Hotep confessed. I can hardly believe how solemn he's acting. All right. I sincerely doubt I could penetrate your defenses. Besides, you're going to start learning defense first, Zephyrus insisted. All the offensive moves in the world won't help you if you can't fend off your opponent. After all, it's hard to attack somebody when you're already dead. Ah, yes, Hotep responded lightly. I suppose I wouldn't be doing you or Yeshua any good if I were already dead. For the most part, Zephyrus maintained an expressionless face. His nostrils almost imperceptibly flared at Hotep's happy-go-lucky response. He doesn't understand how serious this is, but he's gonna find out. If you really want to help Yeshua stay alive, then the first thing you need to learn is how to stay alive yourself, especially when someone else is trying their hardest to kill you. Do you know what the chief weapon of a spy is? I would imagine it would be a dagger, surmised Hotep. Zephyrus drew his dagger from his impressive, ornate shield. In the Roman world, the dagger of choice is the pugio. I'm going to take several measurements of your hands and have one of our master weaponsmiths fashion a hilt specifically for you. But that can wait. Zephyrus handed the pugio to Hotep. Your observations? It's an extremely sturdy weapon, Hotep noted, and I'll take it for granted that this is the highest quality Roman steel because nothing else would suit you. It could also be concealed easily inside a variety of garments. He pointed to the raised middle portion along the flat part of the wide-leafed shaped blade. This is beautiful, but it's not merely ornamental. It clearly adds to the strength of the blade. That's called the midrib, and you're right about the strength. Glaring at the blade in Hotep's hand, Zephyrus felt his body flush with the energy of remembering how he had ended a traitor's life with this very blade 7 years earlier. Can you imagine what would happen if you thrust that thing full force under someone's ribcage into their heart? What do you think we get the expression "to the hilt"? Hotep gasped, for the first time feeling the impact of what possibilities might lie ahead on his life's path. He peered soberly into the intense depths of those clear blue eyes of Zephyrus, the comical and fun-loving Zephyrus, who had actually killed any number of men along his journey through life. Maintaining eye contact, Hotep realized Zephyrus would kill again, in the face of an imminent threat. Hotep gulped some air and realized he'd been holding his breath. Truly, this is a lethal weapon, plain and simple. He handed the pugio back to Zephyrus. As a spy, I expect you to master the pugio as your primary weapon, but it's gonna be a lot easier to train you with the gladius first. Do you know what that is? The standard Roman short sword, answered Hotep, without hesitation. Zephyrus began hefting and swinging some of the wooden short swords. He tossed one to Hotep. This one will do. Let's get out into the training yard. Hotep again found himself trotting to keep up with Zephyrus. A wave of disbelief washed over Hotep. Fresh from a sunrise as a doorman, here he found himself with a practiced sword in his hand, entering the empty training yard outside the barracks of the legionnaires themselves. And the suddenly visible militancy of Zephyrus challenged Hotep's overall sense of reality. The barren yard was not expansive, and felt like a narrow canyon between the imposing fortress wall and the wall of the courtyard. But at least the training yard afforded enough room for several pairs of soldiers to spar. Hotep glanced upward at the dizzying height of the tower. I can hardly believe I'm here. This is amazing. Stand there, Zephyrus ordered. The first thing you're going to learn is how to parry. Do you know what that means? It's when you block your opponent's sword, replied Hotep. Most often, it's not so much to block as to deflect, Zephyrus explained. It's more a matter of redirecting the enemy's sword and its momentum. In the beginning, you'll be tempted to overdo it. Gradually, I'll help you learn the subtleties that make the difference between a novice and a master, which will often eventuate as the difference between life and death. There are two basic styles of sword fighting, with shield and without. Since this is not primarily combat training, we'll need to concentrate on fighting without a shield. When you gain some proficiency with the gladius, we'll start you on the pugio. Shield work can come later. Eventually, you'll be ready to learn how to fight without a shield, with the gladius in your right hand and the pugio in your left. But first things first. Hotep again found himself gulping air, since he literally had been hanging breathlessly on everything Zephyrus told him. Hotep hefted his wooden gladius, preparing himself to enter a new world. All right, Zeph. I'm ready for my initiation. I'm going to start you off right foot forward. This is your stance. Hotep carefully observed and imitated Zephyrus. From a variety of positions, he pounced into his initial fighting stance. Eventually, Zephyrus appeared satisfied. All right, Hotep. First we'll do parry left. As the enemy sword thrusts towards your abdomen, this is your move. Let me run through it slowly a few times and then increase the speed. Eyes ablaze, Zephyrus ran the demonstration through its paces. I'll go slowly again. You imitate me. After the first attempt, Zephyrus shook his head. Here, bring your left hand to the pommel like this. Hotep duplicated the hand motion and repeated the parry. Ah, yes. I can feel it adds support, strength, stability. Mirror me. Without another word, Zephyrus led Hotep through several dozen repetitions. That's acceptable, Hotep. Now, I want you to do the same thing, only I'm going to thrust my sword at you, so you can get a feel for the purpose of your maneuver. We'll start off at an easy pace again. Zephyrus began slowly and repeatedly thrusting the point of his wooden sword at Hotep's abdomen. Once they began increasing speed, Zephyrus would occasionally give pointers, like, remember the relationship of the pommel in your left hip, or don't lose track of your left elbow, or you want to keep the tip of your gladius pointed up at this angle. Soon Hotep was beginning to sweat and breathe hard, but the exercise agreed with him. It also felt rewarding to be learning his first sword-fighting technique. This really feels empowering. Zephyrus held back a moment. Now, I'm going to give you a series of thrusts at full speed. Remind yourself not to overdo it. The only thing you need to do is make sure my sword never touches you. Regarding the motion of a parry, less is more. This principle applies to so much in life, whether it's dancing or fighting or anything else. Don't waste motion. Don't waste energy. Don't waste time. Stay centered. Glaring at Hotep with grim intensity, Zephyrus gasped, "Are you ready?" Hotep assumed his fighting stance and nodded. "Ready." Zephyrus stabbed repeatedly, and Hotep parried. The exercise was punctuated by Zephyrus occasionally saying things like, "Too much," or "Keep that right shoulder aimed forward," or "Don't push like that," or "Keep your weight on your back foot." Hotep got swept up in the excitement and wanted to learn more, to do more. He threw more energy into each move. As he parried yet another thrust, Zephyrus lunged forward and followed up with the heel of his weaponless left hand, ramming the back of Hotep's right shoulder blade with a jarring force that made Hotep's vision swim. Hotep realized too late that once again he had rotated his right shoulder too far. Zephyrus held nothing back, as the heel of his left hand shoved Hotep completely off balance. Hotep rotated his leftward in the air as he fell forward with most of his weight on his right foot, which had been his forward foot, but was now becoming his back foot. Zephyrus completed his lunge with his right foot barely beyond Hotep's. Instantly sliding his left foot forward to establish a new base, Zephyrus reversed his momentum. As he pushed his weight back off his right foot, he hooked his foot around Hotep's. Simultaneously, with a final push off Hotep's shoulder blade for leverage and balance, Zephyrus dropped his weight back onto his left foot, using his own right foot to sweep Hotep's right foot right out from under him. Zephyrus instinctively snapped back into a fighting stance, battle-ready, before Hotep had completed his fall. Hotep landed face first, gasping in the dirt. He coughed as the dust filled his nose and mouth. He panted and spat. He tried to blink the dust out of his eyes. It seemed as though his senses had lost touch with each other and resisted his efforts to garner them. A sickened feeling of thoughtless thoughts, futilely seeking a way to complete themselves. After several more coughs, he pushed himself up onto his knees and continued to struggle with what remained of his consciousness. Eventually, Hotep turned over to sit dejectedly in the dirt. His head remained low, and his breathing labored. His dry mouth failed in its attempts to spit out the rest of the dirt. With a cold edge in his voice, Zephyrus asked, "How does it taste?" Hotep felt emotionally pathetic and physically pained. He looked up at Zephyrus, who still was not breathing hard, nor showing any signs of perspiration. Hotep noted that the almost maniacal glare still emanated from those intense blue eyes. Somehow, those blue eyes helped Hotep regain his mental focus. "Do you know your mistake?" asked Zephyrus. Hotep frowned. "I rotated my shoulder too much and pushed your sword too far away from my body. Too much motion, and it took me off center. I got so carried away concentrating on the sword, I forgot about the man wielding it. Good. I've got something important to say to you." Softening his demeanor for the first time since they entered the compound, Zephyrus graced Hotep with a kindly smile. "You don't have to do this, Hotep. I only want you to take on this training if you're truly willing, or beyond willing, desirous. You can back out now, and I won't think any less of you as a person. But if you want to follow through with your training, you will need to accept this basic fact. Hotep, for every single move I teach you, I'm going to have to put you in the dirt at least 100 times. Sadness welled up in Hotep, and his eyes brimmed with tears. He found himself wishing he had as much moisture in his mouth as he had in his eyes. Trying to swallow did nothing but amplify how emotionally choked up he felt. He bowed his head and stared at the ground, and at the dirt he was tasting. One of his tears plummeted onto a dry ground, forming a single dark brown dot in the field of beige. He wondered how many young men had been humiliated on this very ground. "You wouldn't be here, Hotep, if I couldn't see the potential in you." Zephyrus told him with a combination of kindness and insistence, "I know you love Yeshua. But if you want to become a useful member of his secret security force and run assignments as an agent as well, you will have to understand with every fiber of your heart, mind, body, soul, and spirit that this is not a game for entertainment. In this game, it's your life or someone else's. Worst case scenario, it's the life of Yeshua himself." Slowly and stiffly, Hotep picked himself up and stood with his wooden gladius dangling from his right hand. Raising his eyes to Zephyrus, Hotep steadied his breathing to match the steadiness of his gaze. Hotep's dark brown eyes held their own against the bright blue eyes of his mentor. Finally, Hotep realized why Zephyrus had waxed into his current level of lethality. "Zeph, I know that if Caiaphas ever opts for an assassination attempt, he will hire professionals. I have to learn to live in a state of readiness like you." Hotep slowly but steadily raised his wooden sword at a 45-degree angle, crossed it over his chest, and held the hilt in front of his heart. A wry smile pushed its way through his discomfort, and his eyes looked at Zephyrus with their usual impishness. "Honestly, Zeph, do you really think I'd rather be a doorman?" "Tired yet, Hotep?" "I was 2 hours ago." "You're done for the day," Zephyrus assured him. "Except that I want you to witness a demonstration." A small patrol had entered the compound. Zephyrus called out, "Modestus, come here." The soldier marched into the training yard. Slightly taller than average, his big bones and stark facial features lent him a menacing appearance. He smiled in open amusement at the sight of Hotep. "Take Hotep's practice sword," Zephyrus instructed Modestus. I want him to watch some sparring, to see if he can recognize the application of anything he's learned so far." Hotep handed his wooden sword to Modestus. "I'm sure you can do a lot more with it than I can. I'll back off and give you two ample space. Actually, the farther I can get away from Zephyrus and his sword, the better. He's been brutalizing me." Modestus chuckled briefly at Hotep, but then raised his questioning eyes to Zephyrus. "What? You want to show that you can make a fool of a legionary as well?" Zephyrus grinned and shook his head. "No, it's his first day, and we've covered nothing but basic parrying techniques. I want you to come at me so he can observe what he's been learning, translated into action. You attack, I parry, that's all." Modestus looked askance at Hotep and then shrugged. "Good enough. I'm game." Upon assuming the first fighting stance he had taught Hotep, Zephyrus paused and addressed Modestus with a mission-level serious expression. Modestus, Hotep's presence here will not be discussed outside of this compound with any person, by any person, for any reason, understood? Momentarily startled by the intensity Zephyrus was displaying, Modestus stood up straight and gave a quick bow of the head. Yes, sir. I'll make sure everyone gets the message. Good, Zephyrus responded with a smirk. Then have at me. Hotep soon lost himself in the highlight of his day, a gladiatorial bout staged for his personal benefit. Modestus clearly showed that he was a trained professional with a sword, but the unfettered ease with which Zephyrus parried every stroke simply inspired a state of awe. Before long, Modestus began laughing in his enthusiasm, attacking Zephyrus with relish. True to his word, Zephyrus never counterattacked, which only spurred Modestus on to more energetic assaults. Nothing succeeded. Every stroke, regardless of timing or positioning, was deflected with minimal effort. Hotep realized he was witnessing a demonstration of 0% waste of motion. Zeph is always talking about 100% this or 0% that, but this is the idea in action. Hold, shouted Zephyrus, and the action stopped. Damn you, Zephyrus, Modestus jokingly exclaimed. He shook his head and chuckled in the midst of his labored breathing. I'm sure glad we're on the same side. A self-satisfied smile crept forth across his face, but Zephyrus gave no verbal response. He had finally broken a sweat and was breathing a little faster and deeper. Zephyrus, boomed a deep bass voice. Longinus! Good to see you this morning. Peering up at the sun, Zephyrus added, although it might be noon. I'd like your help, Zeph. Stalking across the yard, cutting an image reminiscent of a human lion in the prime of life, Longinus radiated a raw physical confidence that communicated to anyone and everyone that his reputation had never been exaggerated. He slightly more than matched Modestus in height and weight, but Longinus bore musculature that seemed almost unnatural. The centurion's uniform completed the picture of the ultimate soldier. He had removed his helmet, and the color of his thick hair was reminiscent of a lion's fur. Clarity showed in his bright hazel eyes as he greeted Zephyrus. We so seldom see you here. It's really quite auspicious. What's the problem? Asked Zephyrus. Our intimidation tactics with the free traditionalists don't seem to be working as effectively as we had hoped. Longinus replied, We know where they'll be rabble-rousing in about 2 hours, so I'd appreciate it if you would apply some of your cleverness to the situation. I'm at a loss, and so is Roshiah. Their leader came back into town from Passover, as expected, so they're all worked up. He's charismatic and brazen and nothing but trouble. Zephyrus asked, What's his name? Hezreel. Longinus growled with obvious distaste. He brought in a few fresh recruits or new converts or whatever you call 'em. But even worse, these nuisances are starting to call themselves Hezreelites. They're becoming fanatics in another one of those religious cults. Next thing you know, they'll be calling Jezreel their prophet. But there's another facet to the problem, and that concerns us even more. Herod has found out that Jezreel is not only preaching against the Romans, but also against Herod himself. As you might guess, Herod suddenly wants to take action. Of course, he plans to suppress the Zealots as an act of friendship to Rome. That's not an encouraging sign, Zephyrus grumbled. Herod's only strategy would be to order a captain to sweep in with his men and kill the Zealots right there in the street. Herod had then claimed that he slaughtered his countrymen in the name of Rome, and his violence would create all the more antagonism against us. Rushias said the same thing, muttered Longinus. His plain features always took on a chiseled appearance when he waxed grave in his intent. We need to find a way to neutralize these people without unnecessary provocation. In any other province, we could simply kill them as an example. Slowly shaking his head, Zephyrus frowned and growled. Herod is a cunning fox. He would use the massacre to play us up as an ally, while in fact violating the Pax Romana to some degree and undermining our administration. Zephyrus began pacing back and forth, 3 or 4 steps at a turn. Some of the zealot groups would put up a vicious resistance if they anticipated an attack and had time to prepare, but Herod would never give them the chance. He knows if they are taken by surprise, they'd probably fold like linen. They're questionable fighters, because most of their hostility only gets expressed by sticking daggers into other Hebrews who fail to follow their religion assiduously. Assiduously according to the zealots, that is, scoffed Longinus. But I've observed Jezreel's men, and even though they're scary, they don't measure up to their leader's level of courage. At least Jezreel could bolster himself to enter a pitched battle and face grim opposition. But most of his men lack the fortitude? Zephyrus asked. Longinus shook his head dismissively. Most of them would crumble if Herod's men launched an attack. These are amateur assassins, not professional soldiers, and I cringe at applying the term assassins to them. They're the type of dogs who would hunt in small packs and pull down lone sheep. Zephyrus stopped pacing and closed his eyes, breathing steadily. The others waited, knowing better than to disrupt his rumination. It did not take long for the idea to germinate in his mind. Zephyrus opened his eyes, now filled with mischief. Longinus, don't worry about a thing. Is Rushias back at the Praetorium now? Yeah? We just returned from our morning patrols. Is the rabble gone arouse in the lower city? Yes. Heaving a sigh of frustration, Longinus grumbled, It's too bad I'm not allowed to take a simple, straightforward approach and break Jezreel in half. Zephyrus reared his head back and snickered. Or break Herod in half, or even Caiaphas for that matter. I'll meet your patrol at the gates into the lower city in less than an hour. Turning to Hotep, he indicated the padding. Get yourself out of that equipment and go back to the palace. Tell Eumilla to wait for me in my quarters. Tell her to have everything ready for the baths. I'll be wanting some refreshment in about 3 or 4 hours. Dropping the wooden sword, he trotted off toward the courtyard. He veered slightly out of the way and shouted at one of the stable boys. I'll be back in half an hour. Ares will need saddled up and ready. The boy saluted and called back, "Yes, sir, Commander Zephyrus." Lengthening his stride, Zephyrus dashed out of the compound and into the courtyard. Modestus shook his head and mumbled, "Does that man ever run out of energy?" "I doubt it," replied Longinus. He swung his leonine head around and threw Hotep a puzzled look. "Why is he training you?" Hotep gazed unflinchingly into the piercing hazel eyes of Longinus. "This is the first time he's ever addressed me. I don't know that I'm at liberty to divulge that, sir. He could kill me in a heartbeat, and he knows it. So why don't I feel at all intimidated? How strange. And nobody knows Hotep is here, Longinus. And nobody's gonna find out," stated Modestus flatly. "Strict orders from Zephyrus." Enough said. Clearly Longinus would never think to question Zephyrus. He shrugged off the matter and returned to the business at hand. "Modestus, would you like to join our patrol this afternoon?" "Like to?" asked Modestus jovially. "With Zephyrus concocting a plan? I'd pay admission to witness this." "Well, think I'm gonna stop there, 'cause it's the end of the chapter, and it's getting close to top of the hour. And I hope you've enjoyed listening to this installment of Mission of Eternity, the Zephyrus Archives by T.J. Glenn. You can find this book yourself on Amazon.com, and it's available as a Kindle download. And I don't know if you know or not, but you don't have to have a Kindle. You can get a free download Kindle app for your computer, either laptop, iPad, desktop, for free. Did I say free? If I didn't, I meant to. And if I did, I didn't mean to repeat myself. But, yeah, you can do that. And, I think this Kindle book that I got here was only, I'm gonna say maybe $8. And it's about 9,917 pages, it says. And I don't know if that makes a difference on whether you're using a small laptop screen or a larger screen, I don't know. But anyway, I think it's a very interesting book, and I don't know if he's got others up there in the works or not, but I really like the style. I like the attention to detail that he puts in his books. He sure does develop his characters, and the conversation, I think, is very believable, as well as the storyline. So anyway, if you'd like to get your own copy, go to Amazon.com. That's where I found it. Might be out there in other places as well. So anyway, I'm going to let you go, and thanks for listening. See y'all later.